On the way to the company dinner, the traffic seemed like a tangle of lights and horns, a chaotic symphony of the city I already knew by heart. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what my eyes caught in the crowd of cars. There, a few meters from me, a black car, windows slightly lowered, and in the passenger seat, she. My heart missed a beat, my breathing caught, and the feeling of a punch in the stomach hit me hard. She was not alone. The man beside her, the man who should never have been there, slowly leaned in and kissed her. She reciprocated. That kiss. That kiss that should have been mine. That kiss that sealed not just a betrayal, but the destruction of everything I believed in. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so hard I felt the blood pulsing in my temples. It couldn't be true. Not her. No, the woman with whom I shared a life, not the woman who fell asleep every night next to me, who whispered words of love before going to sleep, who said that I was the only man she wanted by her side forever. But there she was. Your lips on another man's lips. A chill ran down my spine. Time stopped. The surrounding noise became muffled. I could only hear the sound of my own heavy, uneven breathing. Something inside me screamed at me to look again, that maybe I had seen it wrong, but my eyes didn't lie. She was cheating on me. Something woke up inside me. A mix of anger, indignation, disbelief. Without thinking, I turned on the turn signal and entered the next lane. I needed to follow them. The car moved forward, weaving between the other vehicles, and I did the same, feeling fury boil in my veins. Every kilometer traveled was a blow to my dignity, an open wound that throbbed stronger with every second. Where were they going? To a motel? A romantic restaurant? A hiding place where she felt safe to betray me without fear? My stomach turned, my mind began to swirl with dark, unbearable possibilities. How many times had she done this? Was it the first? Or had I already been made a fool of for months, years? We crossed an intersection and their car entered a luxury parking lot. A restaurant. My eyes burned, my hands shook on the steering wheel. She was cheating on me and still going to dinner as if nothing had happened. As if I didn't exist. Like I'm just an insignificant detail in your life. But I existed. And I would make her remember that. I waited. I saw them get out of the car. I saw when he opened the door for her, like a gentleman, as if he had the right to treat her like a queen, when that right was mine. I saw her smile at him. A smile that EU should receive. A smile that, for years, I believed was sincere, exclusive. I was wrong. The blood boiled inside me. But I wouldn't make a fuss there. Not at that moment. The night was still beginning, but I knew it would end in a way she would never forget. I entered the restaurant after them, my presence invisible amidst the luxury and false normality of the environment. I saw them sitting down. I saw him touch her hand on the table. I saw when she didn't remove it. Every second in that scene stole a piece of my sanity. I could feel my dignity crumbling, my confidence being ripped from my chest. She didn't hesitate. She didn't regret it. So, I made my decision. I would not remain silent. I got up from the chair where I had strategically sat, and with firm steps, I walked towards their table. The surrounding noise became a distant murmur. The sound of my heart beating was deafening. I was about to turn the tables on the game. I stopped in front of them. I saw her eyes widen when she saw me. Panic spread across his face. She knew. She knew she had been caught. Before she said any words, before I could come up with a pathetic excuse, I stepped forward and did the only thing that needed to be done. With a firm voice, without hesitation, I announced our divorce. There, in front of everyone. Silence swallowed the restaurant. All eyes turned to us. I saw when her lover was paralyzed. I saw her hands start to shake. But I didn't end there. It wasn't just an advertisement. It was the revelation of the truth. Now that everyone is paying attention, let me introduce you to the real woman sitting here in front of me. Her gaze was filled with despair. But it was already too late. Everyone there would know who she really was. And at that moment, before I finished, an unexpected detail happened. Something that neither I, nor she, nor anyone else in that restaurant could have predicted. And that changed everything. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. All stories are fictional, but the lesson is real. Betrayal destroys lives, erodes trust and leaves deep marks that never fade. Get ready, because what you're about to hear, it's not just a story, it's a reality check. Hold on tight, the truth always comes out. Richard always believed that life was a slow and patient construction, where every gesture, every choice, every small detail shaped a solid, unbreakable destiny. He was never the type of man to give in to impulses or get carried away by fleeting emotions. His world was structured, methodical, predictable, and, in some ways, this predictability brought him comfort. He saw no need for big outbursts of passion or exaggerated gestures. For him, love was in constancy, in loyalty, in the tranquility of knowing that someone would always be there. That was why he chose Anna. Or maybe it was she who chose him, years ago, when they were still young, full of dreams and promises that seemed unshakable. Anna was different from him in many ways. He had a vibrant energy, a lightness in his eyes that made any environment seem more welcoming. When they met, it was this light that attracted him. While Richard saw the world through planning and strategies, Anna saw everything as an adventure. She talked about the future with enthusiasm, dreamed of trips, of unknown places, of experiences he would never have considered on his own. In the beginning, that was what made him want to be by her side, the feeling that, with Anna, his life would never fall into monotony. But the years passed, and what was once exciting became a stark difference between the two. He wanted stability, she wanted something new. He sought comfort, she craved intensity. Still, he believed that a marriage was more than just momentary desires. It was a commitment, a silent pact between two people willing to stay together despite their differences. They built a solid life. They lived in a spacious house, with large windows that let the sun in early in the morning, flooding the rooms with golden light. The neighborhood was peaceful, full of trees and silent streets, a refuge for those seeking peace. It was the kind of home Richard always wanted, a place he could come to after a day of work and feel like everything was in the right place. He prided himself on this, on the feeling of control over his own space. Anna, on the other hand, never seemed completely satisfied. Sometimes he would catch her looking out the window, distracted, as if she was waiting for something new to happen, for something unexpected to take her out of that routine that, little by little, seemed to suffocate her. Richard worked at a technology company, a management position that required dedication but also gave him a comfortable position. He was respected, recognized for what he did. I liked the routine, the predictability of numbers, the logic of decisions. Anna, on the other hand, was involved in different projects. I had already tried painting, cooking and yoga classes. Nothing seemed to hold her back for long. She needed movement. He needed stability. This difference, which had previously brought them closer together, now seemed to dig an abyss between the two. Nights at home became silent. Richard arrived tired, often immersed in reports and meetings that still echoed in his mind. Anna, on the other hand, felt increasingly distant from him. I tried to talk, I tried to bring him back into the relationship, but I felt that he was already far away, that his mind was always occupied with something else. It wasn't that he was cold or cruel, Richard had never been like that. But he was absent. Physically present, but absent in all other ways. She felt like she was talking to herself sometimes, that her attempts to get closer were ignored without him noticing. And this feeling of invisibility grew inside her like a silent, suffocating shadow. Still, Richard believed he was doing everything right. Prove her. Be faithful. Be there he saw no real problems in the marriage. For him, love was not a burning fire, it was not made up of grand gestures or intense words. It was the sum of shared days, stable routine, unshakable trust. But maybe Anna didn't see it that way. The company dinner was an important event. Richard always attended, and Anna too, even if she didn't always like it. It wasn't his favorite environment, formal meetings, work conversations, the same circle of people. But she was going. Because that's what couples did. Or at least that's what Richard thought couples did. That night, he put on his suit, straightened his tie and looked in the mirror. His reflection was that of a successful, responsible, stable man. A man who would never have imagined his life was about to fall apart. Anna took a little longer to get ready. When she finally appeared, she was beautiful. The dress fit her body perfectly, her hair was well done, the perfume was subtle but striking. He looked at her for a moment and noticed something strange, a different gleam in her eyes, an expression he couldn't decipher. He didn't comment anything. He just took the keys and said it was time to go. On the way, silence. But it wasn't a comfortable silence. It was a heavy silence, filled with something Richard couldn't name. Something that seemed on the verge of exploding, but that he chose to ignore. Maybe because I preferred to believe that everything was fine. And then, it happened. In the middle of the traffic, between horns and headlights reflecting off the windows, he saw it. His world, once so predictable, so solid, cracked irreversibly at that moment. And the only thing he knew was that nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same as before. The journey to the restaurant seemed endless. The sound of the cars around mixed with the incessant throbbing in Richard's head, a dull pain that began to spread throughout his body. He felt his stomach turn, as if a dark foreboding was seeping into his bones, but he pushed the thought away. He was not a man guided by impulses or exaggerated emotions. He was always rational, calculating. No hasty reactions, no unfounded assumptions. But then, the world around him seemed to slow down as his eyes caught that impossible-to-ignore image. In the next car, Anna. At first, his mind tried to deny what he saw. The human brain has a cruel ability to protect itself from the obvious, to try to find explanations where there are none. But there was no room for doubt. The familiar shine of her hair under the streetlights, the graceful movement of her hand resting on the leg of a man who wasn't him, the curve of her lips as she smiled. And then, the kiss. A quick, intimate touch, full of complicity that crushed Richard from the inside out. His heart hammered against his chest as his vision seemed to narrow, focusing only on that scene. The body acted before the mind, his fingers sliding across the steering wheel as he changed lanes, without worrying about the heavy traffic around him. He followed the car with almost mechanical precision, his every movement filled with something he couldn't define. Fury. Despair. Maybe the two mixed in a lethal cocktail. He needed to see her again, confirm, understand. And at the same time, I didn't want to understand. He didn't want that to be his reality. I didn't want to be the man who was betrayed. But it's gone. Every meter traveled made this clearer, tearing away the illusion of control he maintained over his own life. Their car made a sharp turn, entering the parking lot of an upscale restaurant. Richard didn't hesitate, he stopped a little further away, staying in the shadows, watching as Anna got out of the car and adjusted her dress, smiling at that man as if he were the center of the universe. The gesture, so small, so insignificant, was the final blow. There was no more room for denial. His wife had someone else. And contrary to what he always believed, it wasn't him. The blood pounded in his ears as he walked slowly towards the restaurant. His body moved without his mind following it, as if he were out of his mind, watching everything happen from afar. Each step echoed within him like a drumbeat announcing something irreversible. He walked through the glass doors, immersing himself in the elegant ambience of the restaurant, its yellowish lights creating soft shadows on the neatly arranged tables. He looked around and found them easily. They were sitting next to the window, a strategic place, isolated from the rest of the customers. The man touched Anna's hand on the table, and she didn't flinch. On the contrary, her fingers gently slid over his, a touch so intimate that Richard felt his chest burn. He stood there, motionless, watching. I wanted to understand. I wanted some logical explanation to emerge for that, something that wasn't obvious. But the truth unfolded before him in a cruel way. The looks, the smiles, the small complicit gestures that only couples share. She wasn't there by chance. She wasn't just talking. I was in love with that moment, with that man. And the most painful thing of all was that Richard was not part of that world. No more. The nausea rose strong, his breathing became heavy. But he didn't back down. He wouldn't leave without her knowing she had been caught. For a moment, he wondered if he should confront her there, in front of everyone. He should make that betrayal a spectacle, a revenge scene where he would expose the woman who turned her back on him. But no. You wouldn't give her that pleasure. The humiliation would be different. More surgical. More devastating. He slowly walked to the table. He felt his heart racing, his veins throbbing with adrenaline. Anna, completely absorbed in the moment, didn't see him coming. But the other man noticed. His expression changed subtly, a look of warning that made Anna finally turn her head. The moment her eyes met his, everything around her seemed to stop. The sparkle in her eyes disappeared, replaced by icy panic. The smile that seemed so natural before faded in a matter of seconds. Richard didn't need to say anything right away. His gaze did the work for him. He saw despair take over Anna, the way her fingers slipped from the other man's hand, as if he was trying, too late, to pretend that it never happened. But it was already too late. There were no excuses that could fix what was done. There were no words that could undo the image of that kiss, that touch, that complicit smile that, until a few minutes ago, he believed belonged only to him. The silence between the three was broken by a single gesture from Richard. He pulled up a chair, sat at the table without asking permission. The other man stood rigid, uncomfortable, expecting some explosion, some scene of fury. But Richard wasn't that kind of man. He would not allow his anger to be a cheap spectacle. He just looked at Anna, waiting. Waiting for her to say something. Let him admit it. Let him try to explain himself. The silence weighed like lead. Her eyes were wide, her breathing quickened. Richard knew she was trying to make an excuse, looking for a way out. But no lie would be enough now. She had been caught. And there was no turning back. He gave a small smile, cold, controlled. Then, finally, he broke the silence. I just wanted to see it with my own eyes. Now that I see it, it all makes sense. Anna swallowed. The other man looked from one to the other, not knowing whether he should intervene, whether he should say something. But Richard wasn't interested in him. The focus was on her. The tension at the table was suffocating. The air seemed thin. Anna opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Richard leaned forward slightly, taking his time. Don't you have anything to say? The fear in her eyes was replaced by something close to defeat. She knew there was no way out. But still, there was something she was hiding. Something Richard didn't yet know. And when he found out, everything would get even worse. The silence between the three weighed like a blade suspended in the air, about to fall and tear everything around. Anna clasped her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed on Richard as if she were looking for a way out of the inevitable. The other man, uncomfortable, looked away, aware that there was no way to escape that situation without consequences. But Richard wasn't interested in him. The focus was Anna. The woman with whom he shared years of his life, the woman who, until that moment, he believed he knew completely. But now, looking at her, observing her nervousness, her uneven breathing, the restless look that seemed to search for a way to erase everything he already knew. Richard was sure there was something more. Something he still didn't fully understand. Anna opened her mouth, hesitated. Her breathing was shallow, anxious. Richard kept his eyes fixed on her, waiting. He wanted her to talk. He wanted the words to come out of her mouth, for her to be the one to bring out whatever it was she was trying to hide. But the fear that showed in every line of her face, the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled slightly on the table, everything indicated that she didn't want to say it. Maybe he still believed he could escape. Richard smiled dryly, tiredly. There was no longer any way for her to escape. So, he decided to make it easier for her. His voice low, carrying something dangerous, he leaned forward slightly, keeping his eyes locked on hers. Tell me, Anna. What else do I still not know? The panic in her eyes was immediate. The other man moved uneasily, looked away, passed his hand over his face, as if he was waiting for the right moment to interrupt, to take some action. But Richard didn't shift his focus. He wanted to see. He wanted to witness every second of the moment Anna broke. She tried to take a deep breath, but the air seemed to be lacking. His throat tightened, the words refused to come out. Then, in a desperate gesture, she looked at the other man, as if asking for help. And it was there that Richard found out. The secret wasn't just hers. He was also involved. Richard's patience ran out. He slammed his palm against the table, not caring about the gazes around him. The dry sound made Anna flinch, and the other man's jaw tightened. I asked something. And I want an answer now. The other man, who until that moment had remained silent, finally opened his mouth. His voice was low but firm. Richard, you need to calm down. Richard laughed, a brief, cold laugh, completely humorless. Do I need to calm down? You're sitting in front of me, holding my wife's hand after kissing her in your car, and you think I need to calm down? Anna interjected, her voice finally coming out, although shaky. Please don't do that here. Let's go somewhere else, I can explain. Richard didn't blink. Explain now. Anna closed her eyes for a second, as if she needed to gather strength. When she looked at him again, her face was pale, and her voice seemed to crack. He is not just any man. Richard raised an eyebrow, waiting. Anna took a deep breath, then said it all at once, like ripping off a painful bandage. He is married. The silence that followed was heavy, almost solid. Richard blinked slowly, absorbing those words. Then he laughed again, a bitter laugh that showed nothing but contempt. Ah, so that's it? Not only did you cheat on me, but you also helped this man cheat on his wife. How beautiful, Anna. What a moral high ground of yours. But Anna wasn't finished yet. His gaze wavered again, nervousness rising. Richard realized at that moment that that wasn't all. And then, as if the words burned inside her, Anna finally said what would truly change everything. His wife is here too. Time seemed to stop. The phrase echoed in Richard's mind, as if his brain needed an extra moment to process. But before he could react, before he could say anything, chaos began. A female voice cut through the silence of the restaurant. So it's true. Richard turned his head. Anna's gaze widened in pure despair. The man next to her turned pale. And then, she appeared. An elegant woman, impeccably dressed, her eyes filled with something other than fury. Deception. Pain. Anna's lover's wife. She crossed the restaurant slowly, never taking her eyes off her husband. His face showed no hysteria. There was no screaming, no outburst of uncontrolled anger. Just a lethal silence that made his every step feel like a countdown to something inevitable. Richard watched the scene without moving, without blinking. The betrayed wife stood in front of the table, staring at her own husband as if he were a stranger. So that's it. You didn't even have the courage to tell me. The man opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. Anna looked petrified. The woman then looked back at her. And you were my friend. The pain in that sentence was enough to make Anna lower her head. Richard leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms and watched. I didn't need to say anything more. There was no need to intervene. The damage was already done. And then, without lowering her voice, Anna's lover's wife did what no one expected. He turned to the restaurant's customers, took a deep breath, and with a firm tone, announced for everyone to hear. This woman here, he pointed to Anna, is my husband's lover. The restaurant was plunged into an immediate buzz. Some people tried to pretend they weren't listening, others shamelessly turned to face the scene. Anna let out a choked sound, almost like a sob. Her lover covered his face with his hands. Richard just watched. The humiliation was absolute. And in the midst of all this chaos, only one thing crossed Richard's mind. He didn't need to do anything else. Anna had destroyed herself. The silence that followed the scandal seemed far more deafening than any scream could have been. Anna kept her head down, her shoulders shrugged as if she could shrink her own body and disappear. Her lover remained motionless, his face covered by his hands, unable to look at his wife. The entire restaurant whispered, their eyes fixed on that table, absorbing every detail of the public exhibition. Richard didn't move, didn't look away, didn't show anything other than absolute coldness. He felt the weight of humiliation weighing down on Anna, but he didn't have an ounce of pity. She was tasting the bitter taste of her own choice, and he would make a point of watching until the end. The betrayed wife wasn't finished. Her gaze sparkled, filled with a pain she refused to hide. She moved even closer to the table, fixing her eyes on Anna. His voice was a sharp edge of contempt. How many times? The question hung in the air, filled with something so profound that it made Anna shudder. Richard noticed the exact moment she tried to look for an answer, but failed. Because there was no response that could lessen the destruction caused. How many times, Anna, insisted the woman, now with a stronger tone. Her lover raised his head, eyes pleading, but his wife completely ignored him. She didn't want an explanation from him. I wanted a confession from Anna. Anna finally looked up, her eyes shining with tears that she knew wouldn't be enough to wash away her guilt. His voice was hesitant, weak. I didn't want it to be like this. Richard couldn't hold back the dry laugh that escaped his lips. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. So tell me, Anna. How exactly did you want it to be? Did you want everything to stay hidden? That I continued to live this charade, lying to me every night while I ran into this man's arms? The word man came out full of irony, and Richard saw her lover swallow hard. The betrayed wife shook her head in disgust. I want to know how many times. I want to know how long you were sleeping with my husband while pretending to be my friend. The word friend came out full of venom. Richard noticed how Anna shrank even more, as if she wanted to disappear under the table. But there was no way out. There was nothing that could be done to erase it. Anna ran her tongue over her lips, trying to find her voice, trying to find a thread of dignity within all the rubble of lies that crushed her. It was a mistake, she muttered, but the other woman laughed, a sound filled with anger and contempt. A mistake. A mistake that lasted months. A mistake that involved kisses in cars, romantic dinners and constant lies. Anna's lover finally moved, trying to intervene, trying to take some control of the situation that was completely out of his hands. Honey, listen to me, but his wife turned to him so quickly that he swallowed the words. Don't call me that. You no longer have that right. Richard observed everything without interfering. There was no need. The truth was already there, out in the open, exposed for all to see. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching everything from outside his own body. Maybe it was the suppressed anger, maybe it was the coldness that came with the shock. But he knew that scene would remain etched in his memory for the rest of his life. Anna was no longer the woman he thought he knew. And he would never look at her the same way again. The wife of Anna's lover took a deep breath, then turned to Richard, and something in her gaze made him sit up straighter in his chair. For the first time that night, someone seemed to really see him. And what she said next made something inside him move. "You don't deserve this," his voice came firm, direct. "None of us deserve it." She turned to Anna again, then to her own husband. "You destroyed yourselves alone. And now they will have to deal with the consequences." The woman then picked up the wine glass that was still on the table and, in a precise gesture, turned the entire contents over her husband's suit. The restaurant held its collective breath. The man didn't say a word, he just stood there, motionless, the wine running down the fabric, staining not only his clothes, but everything that was left of his dignity. Then, without looking back, she turned and left. Anna stood there, frozen, her eyes watery, her body rigid as if she had been struck by a fatal blow. Richard stood up, adjusting the lapels of his jacket. He looked at her for a long moment. There was nothing more to say. There was nothing else to do there. He had seen enough. "It's over," was all he said before walking away from the table and leaving the restaurant. The night was cold, the wind biting his face as he walked to his car. His mind was in turmoil, the images of that scene still vibrating inside him, but one thing was certain, he wouldn't go home with Anna. Not tonight. And perhaps never again. The sound of footsteps behind him made him stop. He turned and saw his betrayed wife standing there, her arms crossed, her eyes still shining with a mixture of anger and hurt. She sighed, as if she needed to find her voice. "Do you have anywhere to go tonight?" Richard raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. He opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated. It wasn't the answer that mattered. It was what would come after that night that would truly change everything. The cold wind cut into Richard's face as he stood in front of the parking lot, taking in everything that had just happened. Every word said in the restaurant still echoed in his mind, reverberating like a blow that never stopped hurting. The bitter taste of humiliation, of betrayal, of the certainty that the entire life he built with Anna was nothing more than a well-disguised lie, gnawed at every part of his being. And yet he felt no anger. No more. The anger had dissipated with the brutal revelation, giving way to something deeper, more overwhelming, emptiness. A hole in the chest that no amount of revenge could fill. The betrayed wife remained before him, her eyes fixed on his face as if trying to decipher his thoughts. There was something in the way she looked at him, a silent understanding that needed no words. They were both on the same side of that battle, two strangers united by the same cruel fate. When she finally found her voice, she was direct. "If you need a place to spend the night, I know a bar not far from here. The kind of place where no one asks questions and no one cares if you drink until you forget your own name." Richard watched her for a moment, considering the proposal. His first instinct was to refuse, to say that he needed space, that he preferred to be alone. But the truth was, he didn't want to go home. The idea of walking through the door, feeling the familiar smell of Anna's perfume permeating the rooms, facing the bed where she had so many times believed that he was the only man lying next to her, was unbearable. He nodded slowly. "A bar sounds like a good idea." They walked side by side slowly, in silence, as if they were both digesting the weight of what had happened. When they arrived at the bar, a discreet place with yellow lights and low music, they chose a table in the corner, away from the few customers there. The waiter appeared, took the order without showing any interest, and soon after brought 2 glasses of whiskey. Richard swirled the amber liquid in the glass, watching it for a moment before bringing it to his mouth. The alcohol burned his throat, but he didn't care. Maybe it was exactly what I needed. The woman in front of him broke the silence first. "My name is Laura." Richard looked away from the glass to look at her. It was the first time he really paid attention to her. She had a serene beauty, delicate features, but her eyes carried something broken, like cracked mirrors reflecting memories they would rather forget. He let out a sigh. "Richard." She smiled bitterly. "Well, Richard, it looks like we've had the worst night of our lives." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "No doubt." She took a sip of her own drink before continuing. "Do you still love her?" The question took him by surprise. He didn't respond right away. His first instinct was to say no, that love had died the moment he saw Anna in another man's arms. But would it be true? Does love really disappear that quickly? Or does it just transform, become corrupted, become a weight inside your chest that never completely goes away? He ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "I don't know what I feel anymore. Maybe there's still something there. Or maybe it's just the habit of loving someone who no longer exists." Laura nodded slowly, as if she understood every word. "I ask myself the same thing. If everything I once felt for him really ended, or if it just became so distorted that I can't recognize it anymore. But I think that in the end, it doesn't even matter. What matters is that you can't go back. Not after what happened today." Richard agreed. "No, it can't." Silence settled between the two for a few moments, until she let out a long sigh. "And now? What are you going to do?" He stared at the bottom of the glass as if he could find the answer there. "I'm going to move on. One way or another. I don't know exactly how, but getting stuck in this is not an option." She smiled wistfully. "Maybe that's easier said than done." Richard looked at her, studying her for a moment. "And you? What are you going to do?" Laura shrugged, playing with the melting ice in her glass. "Divorce, without a doubt. I don't want to look at him anymore. I don't want to share the house, the spaces, the memories. I'd rather start over from scratch than carry a ghost by my side." He nodded. "It makes sense." The two drank in silence for a while longer, each immersed in their own thoughts. The surrounding bar seemed like a separate universe, indifferent to what was happening inside them. People laughed, talked, flirted, as if the world was still spinning normally, as if none of it mattered. But for them, everything had changed. After a few more drinks and few words, Laura checked her watch and sighed. "I think that's enough for today." Richard watched her as she picked up her bag and stood up. "Are you sure you're okay to drive?" She smiled sideways. "I'll take a taxi. What about you?" He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the alcohol starting to take hold. "I think I'll stay a little longer." Laura hesitated for a second before grabbing a napkin and writing down a number. "If you need to talk, or just need someone who understands, call me." Richard took the paper and put it in his pocket without saying anything. He watched her leave, and then looked back at the glass in front of him. There was nothing more to be said. Just what would come next. And somehow, for the first time that night, he felt like life would go on. The bar began to empty as the dawn progressed, but Richard remained there, his fingers slowly turning the glass on the table as his mind oscillated between disjointed thoughts and the suffocating reality that surrounded him. The betrayal, the scandal, the public humiliation, everything was still fresh, pulsing inside him like an open wound that he knew wouldn't heal anytime soon. But instead of the initial fury, now what consumed him was a different kind of exhaustion. He was tired. Tired of the pain, the weight of disappointment, the feeling that he had wasted years of his life believing a lie. He took his cell phone from his pocket, staring at the blank screen for long seconds before finally unlocking it. There were multiple notifications, missed calls, unread messages. Some of Anna. Others were from well-known numbers, probably friends or co-workers who had already heard about what had happened at the restaurant. His story, previously private, was now public. He didn't have the strength to read anything. Instead, he opened the only thing that made sense at that moment, the number scribbled on the napkin. Laura. He hesitated. I didn't know what she wanted to say, or even if I should call her. But there was something comforting about the idea of talking to someone who understood exactly what he was feeling. Before he could rationalize too much, he pressed the call button. The phone rang a few times until her voice came on the other end, drowsy but attentive. "Richard?" He took a deep breath before responding. "Did I wake you up?" There was a short pause before a soft sigh. "It doesn't matter. You called. It means you don't want to be alone." He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against his palm. "I don't think so." She was silent for a few moments, as if processing her words, then spoke again, with a softer tone. "Where are you?" Richard looked around, taking in the almost empty surroundings. "Still at the bar." "Did you drink a lot?" "Not enough to forget everything." Laura laughed briefly, a bitter but understandable sound. "I don't think even if I emptied an entire bottle that would happen." He nodded silently, letting her words hang in the air. Then, without knowing exactly why, he said, "I don't know what to do now." This time, Laura didn't respond immediately. Richard heard a faint noise in the background, as if she was moving in bed, adjusting the sheets, or finding a better position to talk. When he finally spoke, his voice was firmer. "You know. You just don't want to admit it." He opened his eyes, frowning. "What does that mean?" "It means you've already decided what you need to do. You're just not ready to deal with it." Richard licked his lips, feeling the dryness of the alcohol and the long night. "I can't just erase the last few years of my life, Laura." "No. But you can stop holding on to them like they're all you have." He didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Laura sighed, her voice quieter now. "I spent years trying to justify the signs. Trying to believe that, somehow, he still loved me. That his absences had explanations. That the changes were just phases. And now I realize that, deep down, I always knew. But I refuse to see. You know it too, Richard. You know it's over." Her words hit him in a way he hadn't expected. Because, deep down, she was right. He knew. He knew the moment he saw Anna with another man. He knew it when he looked into her eyes and found nothing but guilt, but not regret. The truth was there, painful and irrefutable. But admitting it was another story. "I just wanted to understand." His voice was lower than he intended. Laura sighed. "We'll never understand, Richard. And even if we did, it wouldn't make a difference." He was silent. "Do you want company?" Her question came bluntly. He hesitated. "I wanted. Did you need it?" "I don't know if that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. But after all, I don't think we need to just do what's right. I think we have the right to do what we feel like doing." Richard didn't respond right away. He pondered, let the idea sink into his mind. He knew nothing would change that night. Nothing would bring back what was already lost. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to go through all that alone. "Send me the address." And then, he hung up. The morning was cooler when he left the bar, the streets almost deserted. The silence of the city contrasted with the noise inside his mind, thoughts spinning out of control, feelings colliding without respite. But for the first time, he felt that something inside him was changing. He didn't know what would come after that night. But he knew he wouldn't be the same man at dawn. Dawn brought a strange silence, as if the world was suspended between the past and the future, in an interval where everything could be rewritten, but nothing could ever be erased. Richard opened his eyes slowly, the light filtering through the curtains of the unfamiliar room, the warm sheets and the soft scent of another presence still hanging in the air. It wasn't his home. It wasn't the smell of the pillow I slept on every night. And, above all, it wasn't Anna at his side. For a moment, he just breathed, feeling the weight of that early morning imprinted on his skin, on his tense muscles, on his exhausted mind. Then, he turned around, observing Laura sleeping beside him, her face calm despite everything they had been through. There was something comforting in the way she seemed absorbed in her own rest, as if, for a few hours, she too had found refuge in that storm. But Richard knew nothing would change what happened. No hug, no conversation, no moment of distraction could erase the fact that her life had been shattered before her eyes. He got out of bed slowly, picking up his clothes scattered on the floor. There was no regret, but there was no euphoria either. The night they shared was not about passion, it was not about betrayal in retaliation, but rather about a moment of mutual understanding, a pause before the storm that each would have to face alone. He dressed in silence, trying to organize his thoughts that seemed increasingly chaotic. But then, the moment he took his cell phone out of his pocket, reality hit him like a sharp blow to the stomach. Multiple missed calls. Some of known numbers. Others from unknown numbers. But what made his blood run cold was the message that appeared at the top of the screen, sent by a coworker. "Richard, it's in the news. You need to see this." He wasted no time. He opened the news app, his heart pounding, and what he saw made him catch his breath. Anna. Her image occupied the screen. Her face stained with tears, her expression desolate, her small figure being surrounded by reporters as she tried to hide from the cameras. The headline was brutal. Scandal, woman expelled from restaurant after being unmasked in case of infidelity. He scrolled down, reading the article. The text described in detail the scene in the restaurant, how Anna and her lover had been exposed in front of everyone, how the scandal quickly spread through social media. Richard's name was also there. His involvement as a betrayed husband, as the victim of the story, as the one who left without saying a word and let the truth speak for itself. He felt a bitter taste in his mouth. Anna's humiliation didn't end that night. Now it was public. Now everyone knew. He didn't feel sorry, but he didn't feel satisfaction either. That wasn't what I wanted. He wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, but he didn't expect the entire world to be watching. Laura stirred in the bed behind him, her voice sounding hoarse from sleep. What it was? He just showed the cell phone screen. She read silently, her expression hardening. Then he sighed, running his hand over his face. It seems her punishment came quicker than we expected. Richard didn't respond. There was something unsettling about seeing it unfold so quickly. He stood up, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of every decision he would have to make from that moment on. Divorce was inevitable. But now, with all this exposure, it would be even more chaotic than I imagined. He left the room without looking back, grabbing his car keys and going down the stairs of Laura's small apartment. She didn't stop him. He didn't even ask where he was going. They both knew that this was not a beginning, just an unresolved ending. The morning was cold when he got into the car. It was time to end this story. He drove slowly, the radio off, just the noise of the city filling the space around him. When he stopped in front of the house where he lived, he stayed there for a moment, just staring at the facade, trying to find the strength to enter. That place was no longer his home. And it never would be again. When he opened the door, he found Anna sitting on the sofa, her face haggard, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes red from crying. She stared at him as if she was waiting for judgment, as if she still hoped he would say something that could change everything. But he had nothing more to say. She was the first to speak. "Richard. I don't know what to do." He walked slowly to the table, throwing the keys onto the wooden furniture. "You will sign the papers." She closed her eyes tightly, swallowing hard. "Please. I know I made a mistake, but I don't want it to end like this." He let out a brief laugh, humorless, without any trace of emotion. "And how exactly did you want it to end, Anna? Did you want me to pretend nothing happened? Did you want us to continue this farce? Because for me, it's over the moment you choose someone else." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands, as if the pain was finally catching up to her. But it was too late. Richard watched her, feeling a strange detachment. He no longer recognized her. The divorce papers were on the table, prepared the night before. He pushed them towards her. "I already signed. Now it's your turn." She looked at the documents as if they were a death verdict. But he had no choice. His fingers trembled as he held the pen. Finally, he signed. Richard took the papers back, quickly analyzing them before placing them inside the folder. That was it. The end. He turned, walking to the door without looking back. Anna tried to call out to him, her voice breaking. "Richard, please forgive me." He stopped for a moment, his fingers resting on the doorknob. Then, without turning around, he replied. "Some things don't deserve forgiveness." And then, he left. The morning sun hit his face as he took a deep breath, feeling for the first time an immense weight lift off his chest. He was free. "I didn't know exactly what would come next, but I knew that the story had finally come to an end." And across town, Laura was also holding her divorce papers, feeling something similar. Anna and her lover had been exposed, destroyed by their own choices. Richard and Laura, two strangers who found themselves in the ruin of their marriages, now followed paths that might cross again. But one thing was certain. They would never be the same again. Now, I want to know your opinion on this story. What did you think of the betrayal and the way everything was resolved? Leave your comment below and share your impressions. And if you're not yet a subscriber, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Here, we show the truth about betrayal and its consequences. Because betrayal will never be acceptable.